Hi, my name is Robert Paddock. I am an education technology entrepreneur. I started a business called Get Smarter with my brother Sam in 2007. Get Smarter is an online short course business that works with top universities such as Oxford, Stanford, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard, servicing students from all around the globe. That business has now educated just over 100,000 students and managed to achieve a 92% graduation rate. The process of building Get Smarter was a huge amount of fun. We learned a lot, got to engage with some of the greatest minds in online education. I've recently started a business called the Valencia Institute, which is an online high school, which is also servicing students from all around the globe. We're really looking to push the lessons that we learned from Get Smarter into that, albeit servicing a new model.
My name is John Simpson, and I'm at Red and Yellow Creative School of Business. My previous life, I was at UCT, Director of the Graduate School of Business. Then I was the Dean of Commerce at UCT and running a department, School of Management Studies, as well as running an institute which was certainly well regarded by the marketing community, called the UCT Unilever Institute of Strategic Marketing. And now I'm very happy to be here at Red and Yellow.
Hello, my name is Wesley Fredericks. I'm the Managing Director of Red and Yellow Creative School of Business. I've been here for the last 4 years. It's an amazing privilege to lead the team here at the school. We've been around for 26 years now, and not only do we have a full-time campus where we service about 300 students, we also have an online school where we also service thousands of online students. Prior to me being here at Red and Yellow, I spent time as a change manager and working as well in the online e-commerce space for a retailer in South Africa. I try to combine all my past experience to help grow Red and Yellow.
So, gents, one of the thoughts I've held for quite a long time is that education seeks to satisfy multiple jobs. Like, it tries to do a lot of things simultaneously. Yeah. And one of the questions that's always been on my mind is, how do we start to prioritize what's the most important aspect of our educational system to move forward? And what are the things that we should reasonably start to deprioritize, because you can't do everything, right? And so that's maybe a place to start with this conversation, is if we're thinking about affecting radical change in our education system, what are the specific components that we think that we should be focusing on? I mean, I've got some thoughts, but I'd love to get your guys' initial, even just gut reactions to that.
Yeah. Well, just off the top of my head, I think where we're not getting it right is preparing our learners for a complex future. I think, in terms of the curriculum that we have had based in the past, it kind of set folks up for success in a way that didn't necessarily allow them to think for themselves. It was what to think rather than how to think. And I think certainly an area that we need to make sure that we get right going forward is to teach people exactly that. I mean, at Red and Yellow, we believe creative thinking is the most important skill for the future. And so if we don't embed that into the fundamentals of what we're teaching people at an early age, you're just not, I don't know.
Yeah, I have a slightly different approach, because I agree completely with what you said, excepting I think that there's a fundamental issue, and that is, if we're looking at kids that even when they enter high school for the first time, so many of them are fundamentally uneducated or undereducated. No matter what you may say, everybody has to have a grounding. They have to be able to read and write and calculate and do things like that. But before you can actually start to inculcate in them the kind of value systems and the issues which are going to give them jobs in our new exciting future. But the reality of our country is that 27% of South African kids who've been in school for 6 years cannot read or write. Now, if you have a situation like that, no matter how hard you may try to prepare them for a new world, a new needs of people to be able to do things which their parents could never even came across, let alone could do, then I think we have to go back to the basics. And the fact is that we spend probably more as a percentage of GDP on education than 85% of countries in the world, and yet our results are the worst. And it just says something about having to start at the beginning before we can actually take our students to the kind of levels and thinking and so on, which both of you have actually just communicated.
Absolutely. And complex, I mean, especially given South Africa's past, And like, where do we start to focus our effort geographically? How do we think about the intersection between the politics of different provinces that we have and where we focus on education? And then there's a whole bigger picture discussion around teachers and teacher education and how we effectively enable those teachers and hold them accountable for actually doing the job that we so desperately need them to do. I mean, Prof, the numbers you referenced, I mean, it's eye-watering. I mean, it's almost surprising we're not jumping up and down the streets every single day saying, what is going on? This is unacceptable. We can't continue.
I think it's historical. I think that the new government in 1994 came in. They closed down the Teachers Training College. They closed down the technicons. And the reality is that those two issues on their own are so fundamental to the future of our children. If you're taught by teachers who are ill-trained to be teachers, who aren't committed to be teachers, effectively, where do you start? And the politics, as you rightly point out, has a very serious role to play.
The value that we place on teachers it's nowhere. And considering that the future of our country is dependent on the level of learners that are coming through the system, we've dropped the ball big time.
Something I've been thinking about quite a lot as it relates to teachers is that one of the issues that you see, and it was interesting, I was actually sitting with the CEO of the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation 2 weeks ago, and they've put a lot of emphasis on teacher training, professional development for teachers, really understanding that if we can upskill the quality of teachers in the classroom, no matter where they are and which areas they live in, they can have an outsized impact on the quality of education, regardless of the socioeconomic conditions around them. It's staggering what can be achieved. And yet, one of the big issues that they found is that the more time and effort they put into upskilling these teachers, the more likely it is that those teachers will move out of those areas and be drawn into more urbanized areas where they get paid better, where they can have a better quality of life and so on. And this is, at least for me, a tension point which it's hard to see your way around that. I mean, if we're going to put more effort into upskilling teachers, but they're going to continuously move as is completely reasonable, and we can understand that. Like, where does that leave us, and where does it leave the learners who actually need the highest quality of teachers because they've been historically disadvantaged? Where does it leave us? And I've got some thoughts. Around that naturally, but I would be interested in your guys' views on teacher education generally, or any exposure you may have had to that space.
To me, it's a fairly straightforward thing. The first thing I always appreciate is that teachers, and whether we're talking about university, or whether we're talking about high school or junior school or preschool, it's a calling. And if you aren't there because you want to be there, but because it's a job, then effectively you are going to struggle to convey to the children something which says, I want to be this, I want to do that. I mean, I wonder how many really successful people in the world actually can tell you that a certain teacher actually caused them to think, to do the kind of things which they have. It's a job as opposed to a calling. Then that kind of vacuum is going to exist.
It's the question of purpose. We firmly believe in purpose-driven organizations, but I think purpose-driven people are just as important. And to Prof's point, when it becomes a job, a vocation, rather than a calling, rather than a purpose behind helping to change the lives of employees, then really that's fundamentally a problem. I think structurally as well, we've got it wrong. Just in terms of the timing, we just had the budget speech, and I think there's even more that we could be doing in terms of just allowing how we're channeling our funds and ensuring that when those funds are channeled, that there are measures in place to ensure that they're being used in the correct manner. So that's another high-level discussion we can go into, but I think just as a high-level point, I think that's something that we need to get right.
And I think there's another thing, and that is when teachers haven't been properly trained, and if they don't regard their position as being a calling to advance and help people to be better and so on, they tend to fall back onto ways of teaching which are frankly unhelpful. They teach by rote. I mean, I can recall at the University of Cape Town we used to use a thing they still do called Turn It In. When students submitted a particular project or an exercise, this was run, and the number of children who had been at the township type schools, the state schools, the poorer ones, who failed dismally on Turn It In because they had been taught that you don't think, who just regurgitate what's in the book. Now, if you get to university at that level, it just tells you how difficult it's going to be to direct them to fit in with the needs of the new age, where we're expecting people to think out of the box, to be creative, or else to go into areas of the technical world, which frankly our schools don't do. So to me it's very, very problematic, and I worry tremendously about so many people who say this is what we're going to do to make people creative and so on. If they haven't been brought to a certain level, it's going to be extremely difficult to do that.
Yeah. So, Prof, I think you make an unbelievably important point about developing those base level skills, almost the foundation on top of which we can build everything else: creative thinking, collaboration, all the kind of 4Cs, 4IR related skills, etc. And I think something that scared me recently was seeing a stat from 2016 where 60% of the teachers in the Eastern Cape that were teaching the equivalent of grade 7 level mathematics couldn't actually pass the examination at the same grade level they were teaching it at. And it's hard to start to think beyond that unless we fundamentally reimagine that role of educators and how we bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for teacher education. I think there's a lot to be said about what we did in terms of closing down the teacher training colleges and so on. The private sector does seem to be stepping in to a degree, but it's highly politicized. I want to venture a view that I think that one of our biggest opportunities here is to start realizing that the real opportunity of technology in this space, and not in a kind of low resolution thinking way.
Right.
And what I mean by that is that some of the well-intended interventions with technology have included the lines of logic like, okay, we'll put a tablet in everyone's hands, we'll make sure they've all got internet access, and then everything's going to be great. They've got access to the content, they can make their way through it, and it's like, no. It doesn't work. It's failed every single time we've done it, both here and abroad. If we're not thinking about the integrated whole, and we're not thinking about how we can use technology, at least by my estimation, to increasingly streamline the plethora of inefficiencies that often sit in the education system and create more time for teacher and student interaction, create more time for student and student interaction. There's a huge amount of inefficiencies in education. You think about the admin that most teachers are drowning in every single day. It's staggering, and you go into those schools, and I think for people who've come from a commercial background, you go into those schools and think that this can be automated, that can be automated. Like, it's not actually necessarily about the fancy artificial intelligence and so on. It's actually, a lot of it's quite straightforward. It's basic business process mapping and streamlining. And at least for me, I think that this is one of the greatest gifts that we can do in our schooling system, is actually using technology to streamline that incredible administrative load that most teachers have dealt with every single day. Even if you're a good teacher, you can't be as good as you could be if you're drowning in administration.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree completely, but I would actually take the issue of technology a bit further. Many people have this view that if you put technology in the way, then you don't have to interact with the students. The idea being that you give them a tablet, and they're going to work on their own, and that's it. Well, the reality is that actually there's a need to integrate both interactions with technology, so the student actually can, in some way or other, interact with the teacher while they are using the technology. And frankly, that's something which people don't really understand.
I agree with you. I think perhaps what's happened is that technology has been looked at or used from a perspective of trying to scale rather than trying to increase engagement.
I mean, so we've got a project at the moment, which, if you indulge me, I'll tell you a little bit about. So we've got, we're working with the Western Cape Education Department. We've identified a school in Mitchell's Plain that's been quite radically underperforming, not without heroic efforts from the principals and the teachers there. It's just that the circumstances are very difficult. We've taken a previously unused classroom, and we've turned that into what we call a digital lab. So there are 30 students now who are being put on what would be considered a kind of blended learning experience, where basically their academic experience is entirely online. But when you think about an online experience, you think about you just interacting with the computer and so on. No. This is actually, these students are interacting with some of the best teachers in South Africa who are living and earning in Cape Town CBD, and they are having live sessions with these students every single day. real interactive classrooms. Imagine a Skype-like environment but built specifically for education. It's in small classrooms, typically about 15 students at a time. And the results, guys, already are just, it's staggering. There is potential there. Like there is untapped ability that just needs to be realized. And then what we've got in addition to that is that the students are completing some of their work asynchronously online. So that would be including watching video lectures, engaging with notes, interactive quizzes, graphics, infographics, etc. And the last piece of that is that we actually have a mentor on the ground. That mentor is from the community, is a culturally relatable figure, and we call her their cheerleader. Right. She's in the classroom with them. Her role is to provide that critical pastoral care. Because I think that the role of a teacher is actually quite complex. Like we ask them to do a lot of jobs, right? It's like, okay, so you must be a curriculum designer, you must be a lesson planner, you must be a facilitator, you must be a classroom manager, a counselor, a social worker, a sports coach, and and the list goes on. And it's actually like you kind of step back from that and you look and you think like, that's an unreasonable job description. Like, who on earth? No wonder we don't have enough good teachers. It's like it's not a reasonable job description. So what's been really cool with this project that we're running at the moment is we've effectively been able to start disaggregating that role. There's a separate team of curriculum designers who are doing that work. There's a separate team of producers. There's a separate team of facilitators. Separate team of subject matter experts who are quality assuring the overall process. Separate team of mentors, administrators, etc. And then the really hard work becomes, well, how do you coordinate the efforts of those students? And that for me is where tech can really play a profound role. Things like learning analytics, making sure you've got the right rhythms between those teams, it's magic what can happen. And so it is early days, but at least for me that's the sort of exciting intersection of technology and education.
I must say I find that so exciting, and because I remember some years ago Helen Ziller, when she was head of education in the Western Cape, she told me a very interesting thing. She said there's so many schools with those days fairly basic computers, laptops, which are totally unused. They get given by some very concerned person in Finland, and it comes out here and by the sort of bucket load, and they put there and they never use because nobody knew how to use them. It's as simple as that, you know. So you're taking this to the next stage, which I find that fascinating. I really do. I think you're onto something really wonderful. It's the integration between interaction with a teacher and the technology. The other thing what you were saying a moment ago really also interests me. You were saying the number of different roles which a teacher has to carry out. It's more difficult the poorer the community you're working in. So if you talk about Rondebosch Boys High, I'm sure it could work irrespective of whether you have that technology or not. But if you're talking about like Mitchell's Plain or Kailicha, it must be so difficult for the teacher with a disparate group of students having to do all these things and still keep his or her head above water.
What I love about what you're describing is that the technology is being used to facilitate and optimize learning experience rather than just technology for technology's sake, which I think sometimes is the problem that we face. You know, there's this latest craze, or, you know, not to say that there isn't a space for something like virtual reality yet, and I think that's coming, but, you know, how does that practically advance somebody's learning experience right now? And I think once we get into the detail of that and we understand it properly and we can implement it, let's do the thorough research.
But you see, this goes to another point, and that is we need to say what's the outcome going to be.
Yes.
And the outcome doesn't have to be that the student has to go to university. Incidentally, I get very worried because many of the students go to university to take courses which are never going to get them a job. And the reason is because they don't know. Nobody's taught them or told them what's available, what they should be doing. They don't understand. Nobody talks around the table, which happens in the upmarket communities. So for me, the next stage is to say, how do we start to channel that kind of learning which you're talking about towards the job markets, the needs of the country?
Love that. Really. I think this for me is such an important point because it speaks to that. What are we prioritizing in education? If we can assume that through some hard work and some creative application of tech and good education practice, we can get the model right, then what are we prioritizing? And I think that your point is so well made, Prof. Are we preparing these students for the current jobs that are in demand by industry? And it's not obvious to me that we're doing that at the moment. And I think we've got the opportunity to start thinking about, even at the high school level, let alone at the tertiary level, the idea of more kind of boot camp related programs that are integrated within the curriculum, the kind of streaming of students from quite an early age with like very strong career guidance, making sure they understand like, okay, so if you take these subjects, like this is where, here's the branching scenarios of where your career might go after that, and to be clear about that.
Yeah.
That's not often the conversation. And
they're not getting it from home, you see. The three of us here, no doubt, when we grew up, we talked about the kind of jobs, we talked about what we wanted to do, where we wanted to go. That doesn't happen in the poorer communities.
Totally. And I think this also speaks to, if we're expecting that the teachers are going to be able to do all their other jobs and career guidance, like, wrong. It's unreasonable. There's no way it's going to happen. So starting to think again about how this intersection between technology and the kind of specialization of let's call it the disaggregation of the multiple tasks that a teacher is expected to play, and then let someone come in who can specialize in that task and offer it at scale with a much higher efficacy than someone doing it part-time, kind of half knowing what they're talking about. And so for me, at least when I think about this and how this concept might roll out, it's actually a fundamental reimagining of the educational space, of the educational organizational structure that supports kids in learning. I think we've become so accustomed to you come into a school, you've got a principal, you've got department heads, you've got teachers that might sit underneath them in their kind of 7 to 10 subjects, and that's just the way it is. And it's like, I think we've got to purposely break that paradigm. It doesn't seem obvious that it's working, that it's achieving our new objectives for this society.
And the teacher's goal is to say, they passed and they're out of here. That's all I need to have done. That's my objective, my goal. It shouldn't be that. It goes back to this being a calling as opposed to a job. It says, how can I stimulate kids to have interest in things beyond where we are right now? And it's very, very difficult to do, particularly more difficult depending on the community which your students are coming from.
So what I love about what you've shared here is the disruptive nature of what you're talking about, and particularly within the entrepreneurial space, we need to be thinking in a disruptive manner to break new ground, to move forward. I think what I'd love us to chat about now is just how we get that disruptive thinking into how we spearhead the future of education in South Africa. We've got a government who's leading the charge on it, when actually what we need to be doing is saying, hey, private sector, let's get involved in how we break open new ground within the education space. And I've been encouraged in some of the workshops that I've recently headed up. These are guys that are saying, hey, we're private sector, we need learners coming through the system who we can employ in the future. We can't do that because they don't have the requisite skills. We're hiring people from Toronto and Canada. We need to get involved in changing it at the roots.
I think it's such an important point, and maybe at the heart of it is the fact that a lot of entrepreneurial activity by nature is disruptive. There's a tendency of the private sector to come in, look at situations and say, that's broken, that's broken, that's broken, and that's why there's an opportunity for me immediately to step in and do something about it. And yet, from the government side, there's far more of a regulatory and compliance aspect to the way they think about it, which is understandable considering the multiple layers and the kind of politics behind it. I think that's well said. And at least in my experience, and if anyone else is considering this, I would think along these lines. Government is a critical stakeholder if you ever want to truly roll anything out on mass scale as it applies to any sort of low-cost provision of education. There are some wonderful players in the private sector market who are making serious inroads into trying to make private sector education more affordable. Groups like Spark Schools and others, but we're still sitting at like 30 odd thousand rand a year, which we're not going to be educating like the vast majority of South Africans that way. If we don't start to think meaningfully about integrating with government, we're never going to be able to truly reach the bottom of the pyramid. And so at least with the project that I discussed now, one of the reasons we've been keeping so close to the Western Cape Education Department is because of exactly that reason. If we can figure out a model that can scale high quality education more effectively, initially throughout the Western Cape, but hopefully further than that, we can't actually do that at a sufficiently low price point without the government's support. And what I've seen from the government, and I really must sing their praises for this, the Western Cape Education Department, is a willingness to look at alternatives at this stage right now, because honestly, where we're going is quite frightening if we don't start making some alternative solutions. So to give you one stat which blew my mind when I heard it from the minister, to deal with population influx into the Western Cape alone, we have to build 22 new schools per year, just for the population influx. That's not the growth of the existing population, that's just migration into the Western Cape.
Good grief.
We have the budget to build 4. And so what ends up happening is that those students who can't get into those 4 schools are either lost in the system or they get shoved into already overcrowded classrooms. That's a systemic issue that is not going away.
Right.
And the Western Cape Education Department and others are looking at this and saying, if we don't start to think about digital in a very meaningful way, we're not going to make it. Like we honestly, we can't keep putting more students in classrooms. We've done that for a decade, and we're seeing where that's going.
Right.
So I found them actually to be very, very engaging, not without concern, but very, very engaged on matters where the private sector is coming to them and saying, guys, let's think about this differently. Let's work together. Let's try to mitigate the risks and the downside, and for them to provide input and support, and that has been unbelievably helpful. But then let the private sector take the risk, the capital risk, the IP risk, etc. And it's early stages, but thus far it's been really interesting.
But I 100% agree with you. I think even in some of these conversations that have been happening, the likes of Debbie Schaefer, the likes of Mr. David Rainier, being involved in those conversations with the private sector is so important from their perspective as well, because they know that without the private sector's involvement in this, there is no disruption. And so I concur with you on that. I mean, Prof, from your perspective, and you've been in the game for a while now, where does the rubber hit the road for us in terms of?
Okay, I'm going to answer that in a rather remote way. I'm going to say we need plumbers. And I'm going to say to you that people think that being a plumber is in no way entrepreneurial, as in no way is going to give a person the job to be a manager, etc. That kind of look upon as being the sort of skivvies of the world. The reality is exactly the opposite. Those are the kind of people we need desperately in our society. There's no way that our education at the moment is actually addressing that. It's quite interesting. I was chatting to a mutual friend of ours who told me that this government desire, which you probably heard Mr. Ramaphosa talk about in the budget and his State of the Nation address, about the thing that they're now having a second stream of school, which is the technical side, which people can choose. He tells me, and this guy is very, very knowledgeable, he's very involved with schools, that the dropouts are being sent to those schools, which is exactly the wrong thing. You have problems there of discipline and so on. The reality is actually we should be giving as much time to educating and as much emphasis in educating people who are going to be academic, should I put it that way, as they should be learning to be the kind of technical people who are so important for our society. And that again is another way of addressing the needs of our society in the future.
So gents, I think in summary, first of all, this has been such a useful and fascinating conversation, so thank you. From my side, in summary, I think part of what we've diagnosed is that there is such a need for almost a seismic shift in the way we think about education, in the fundamental assumptions that we go into education with that actually need to be revisited and reconstructed. And it almost feels to me like we've got we've got all the right pieces. We just need to start thinking about how to rearrange them appropriately for the new age that we find ourselves in, for the new priorities that we have in front of us, and really for the opportunities which are appropriate for our context, our time in South Africa right now. I mean, Prof, your point around plumbers just couldn't be better made. When I look at that scarce skills list, I see boilermakers, plumbers, electricians, and how we're thinking about our education system in a very targeted way to focus on those. In addition, how we're thinking about making sure that we access students who are in the most remote areas and still providing them high quality provision. How we're thinking about making the life of teachers a more reasonable request so that they can actually focus on doing the thing that only great teachers can do, which is facilitating that in-person environment, that rich collaboration, that desire to move away from kind of the didactic instruction more towards the guide on the side, facilitator role. I mean, this is, these pieces all feel very interconnected. Yes. So thanks, I've really enjoyed this conversation and hope we do it again.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's great.